And yeah, the meeting is being recorded. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elena Stepanidis. I'm a program executive in the Chief Science Data Office at NASA headquarters, and I've been co-chairing the Science Mission Directorate Data and Computing Architecture study with Mike Little, and this workshop is a part of that study, so welcome. I'm really excited that we have Philip Blood here from the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center to speak to us today. But before I hand it over to Peter to introduce Philip, I wanted to just introduce the study a little bit and talk a bit about what we're doing with open source science at NASA. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks, Hannah. So the Science Mission Directorate is running a data and computing architecture study to help find ways to better coordinate cloud and high-end computing at NASA. And this is really timely for us because NASA has started to really prioritize open source science. So there have been a set of policies, for example, that have outlined how SMD funded science is to be made open. And so we really need to work at NASA on making sure that our data and computing systems are really effective in providing these services to users and supporting open science. So this study is part of that, is part of collecting that input. So next slide, please. So the scope of this study, it's the data and computing systems that support SMD-sponsored scientific workloads and processes. So the system supporting scientific modeling and simulation, data processing, data analytics, and AI/ML. And there are a number of capabilities under consideration that we're looking at NASA. Next slide, please. So I just want to quickly go through the code of conduct, for this meeting. We just put this up at the beginning because we just want to remind everyone we want to have a really positive and respectful experience at these workshops, and we want people to feel safe to talk about what they're thinking about. And so we just put this up every time just to remind folks to treat others with respect, treat people as you'd like to be treated. And if you are having an issue, something happens in the meeting, please let one of us know, and we'll do our best to make sure the problem is resolved to the best of our ability. So we really appreciate you all adhering to the code of conduct so that we can have a good meeting for everyone. And with that, I will hand it over to Peter.
Very good. Thank you, Elena. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I'm Peter Williams. I will be helping to moderate the discussion today. To participate, if you'd like to submit a question, there are two ways to do that. One is we're using what's called NASA's I/O tool. You can anonymously post a question using the QR code below, or you also, I've put a link in the chat. You can click on that and get access to the list of questions that are currently in there, and feel free to add your own as they come to mind. And you can upvote questions that you see on the list. The alternative, if you'd like, is to use the WebEx chat. I'll copy and paste those questions over to the I/O tool as those come in, and I'll do that in the background to the best of my ability. Can we go to the next question, or I'm sorry, the next slide? We originally had two speakers today. We have guests from the Pittsburgh Supercomputer Center. Jonathan Silverstein is not going to be able to join us. Phil Blood is here. And Phil's colleague, Sergiu Sanyalev, pardon me, Sanyalev.
You don't even try on that one, Peter. Don't even try. You've got to work. You've got to work there for 10 years to get that. So
yeah, okay. My apologies, Sergiu.
So Sanyalevich.
Sanyalevich. Okay, thank you
Just
very
ignore some of
much.
those vowels. Yeah.
Yeah. And similar to our previous talks, we hope to hear an overview of the Pittsburgh Supercomputer Center work seen through an open source science lens. Hear some about the user needs and business needs that they see that might be likely relevant to SMD's transition to open source science, some best practices that might be identifiable through their work, and some insights regarding data and computing architecture. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Philip Blood. Phil is the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center Scientific Director. In that capacity, he directs PSC's research and research support teams, including biomedical applications, AI and big data, and user support for scientific applications. He has focused on architecting, building, and supporting cutting-edge research resources that provide the means to overcome difficult scientific questions. The mission for the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center is to apply advanced computing to enable discoveries that benefit the world. Joining Phil today, Sergio is Director of Support for Scientific Applications at Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. He served as Deputy Director of the Extended Collaborative Support Service of the US NSF Exceed project and manager of its Novel and Innovative Projects program. In that capacity, he has fostered non-traditional and interdisciplinary applications of advanced computing and data resources since 2011. He's currently the principal investigator of the Bridges 2 project and co-PI of the NeoCortex project at Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. With that, Phil, can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure for me to be able to join you today, and apologize on behalf of Jonathan Silverstein, who had a personal thing come up early this morning with very little notice. So I'll be running the show today, and some things Jonathan would have been able to dig deeper on with you, but I'll let you know what those are if we hit those topics, and happy, of course, to follow up with questions and any interest that comes out of this discussion afterwards, and hopefully develop some connections and opportunities for future collaboration together. So I guess I'm going to reshare my screen. Great. Okay. So just give me a shout if anything doesn't look the way it should. So thanks for the very kind introduction. And I've excused Jonathan. Sergio, I think, will be trying to join us. I'm not sure if he's been able to jump on yet, but hopefully he'll.
Yes,
I'm here.
He has made it.
Hey, great.
Yeah, I'm here.
Glad Sergio. So Sergio, in fact, has a lot of depth in the first part of the talk, where we'll talk about what PSC has been doing on as a national research support effort, and on kind of our NSF side, our sort of bread and butter supercomputing, as Sergio recently has become the principal investigator for our primary supercomputing system, Bridges 2. And so particularly when we get to the conversation later, I'll be very happy to have him jump in and help answer some questions in more depth, as I've been focused more recently on a collaboration with Jonathan, doing big data on the NIH side, the biomedical side of things. So the talk will be roughly divided into those two pieces. First, talking about sort of overall PSC a little bit, and our NSF focused supercomputing national resource providing efforts, and then the second part will be on the NIH big data infrastructure development and overall open science and open data efforts. So I'll go ahead and jump in. So this is sort of PSC at a glance. As I mentioned, for many, for 36 years or and counting, we've been a national service provider primarily through the various efforts funded through the National Science Foundation. Most recently, we're a major partner in 10 years of Exceed, and this was many of you are probably familiar with this effort. It was an effort to bring together all the NSF resource providers and the necessary services to support people doing computational science on those resources, and provide a lot of human support to complement the computational resources that NSF is funding. And I think that'll be a primary takeaway from the discussion about supporting open science and research, is that it is a very human intensive effort to provide the kind of things that researchers need to really accomplish the cutting edge science that they would like to do, utilizing the best resources available. So some of you may also be aware that recently, every 10 years, funding agencies got to change what they're doing. So so there's a new program to coordinate all of the NSF resources, and this is called Access. And PSC continues to play a primary role in that. We but we also have a diverse array of funding sources as well through NIH and through the state and through other entities. Heavily engaged in education and training, supporting local and distributed training through, again, these NSF programs and through many other local programs. And very tight connections in Pittsburgh. We're mostly homed right now at Carnegie Mellon University, but more and more, especially recently, we've had a growing partnership and role at the University of Pittsburgh, and so that's been a very productive partnership for us. We have just an expert team that runs key networking resources in the region, and which is a great benefit for us in our distributed role in providing services and data to the research community and receiving data to make available to others, as you'll see later. This is all built on also some key industry partnerships. So let's see. There we go. So some of the computing resources that we have available right now. Peter, I want to time myself, but I didn't remember when you stopped and I started. So give me a time that I should target here.
I think if you aimed for, I don't know, 10 minutes after the top of the hour, maybe quarter after,
Okay.
that would be great. And, if it runs a little long, we have until an hour. We have an hour and a quarter from now, if that helps.
Great. Yep. Thank you. So, so Bridges 2 is our latest general purpose supercomputing system. Follow on to the previous Bridges system that we deployed at PSC, and I think we'll get a little bit into Bridges in a minute. Complementing that at PSC are a couple of special purpose, highly innovative platforms. One, NeoCortex, which is this Cerebras developed, very large scale wafer technology that fits hundreds of thousands of cores on a wafer and has special capabilities, especially for facilitating potentially a lot of different things, but being applied especially to artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analytics. And so this was funded about the same time as Bridges 2, as a innovative novel system that would not immediately be made available to the national research community like Bridges 2 was, but would be developed in collaboration with the research community and with Cerebras to target the types of applications that that researchers would like to do with this new technology. So there's been a lot of early friendly users who've applied and who have been running they're doing their work on NeoCortex as we move towards making it a national resource allocated like similar to Bridges 2, now via the Access program, the NSF Access program coming up in the next year. So, and then the other special purpose supercomputer at PSC is been around for a long time, actually, although we refresh it every few years. This is a partnership with D.E. Shaw Research, who developed a not just special purpose sort of general like to a general class of problems, but really special purpose, focusing on one very specific problem, which is biomolecular simulation using molecular dynamics. And for that, the combination of the special purpose ASIC that they developed and their special networking that goes right on, that delivers data right into that chip. This machine is, and especially its newest iteration, the Anton 3, which we're bringing to PSC hopefully next year. It's 100 times faster for that application than anything else out there. Doesn't matter how big a system you build for molecular dynamics, how many cores or GPUs you have, Anton 3 will be 100 times faster because it can scale the algorithms, since they're right in the hardware. The algorithms are expressed directly in the hardware, and it's been just very successful for the past 10 years for that particular community at PSC. So we'll talk a little bit about Bridges 2 and some of the practices that have benefited the research community. This is our broadest reaching system in terms of different types of science and different communities that we're serving. And so the architecture reflects that. We had a lot of success over the previous few iterations of these systems with creating a lot of flexibility in the design, so that we're supporting all the different types of workloads that we see from the research community, and in particular, I think as everyone has seen, a lot of interest coming to us from domains of science that had not traditionally been users of these big national cyber infrastructure systems, and so with a focus on Bridges 2, in particular, diverse types of nodes, from GPU to large memory, and then your more standard memory nodes with access to resources for fast I/O for the data intensive, in particular data-driven research, and then also the parallel lustre file system for more standard, highly distributed, high performance computing workflows, and then also web applications, like some of you may be familiar with the On Demand project out of Ohio Supercomputer Center, and this has been a great boon, especially for those sort of data intensive, data focused projects that are doing machine learning applications and utilizing Jupyter notebooks and these kinds of interactive computing tools. And so this is just to give a snapshot of a wide range of applications that we support, from genomics to astronomy, and then very practical things like weather modeling and prediction of the impact of hurricanes and other real life applications that are actually in real time affecting the world. And we've had a lot of success in terms of working with users and being able to help them with their particular challenges, and I think overall we've cultivated a reputation for being responsive to the user community. So some of the, as I talked with Sergio and Tom Maiden, who have been sort of the tip of the spear in engaging our users, some of the things in the context of Bridges 2 in particular, this sort of a general purpose computing system, some of the best practices that have percolated to the surface over the years are, no surprise. I think, not too much surprise here, but a lot of flexibility and quite a bit of human work to make things to help accommodate the various needs. There's not really a way around this. It requires a significant investment in developing relationships with researchers, understanding their needs, and being accommodating to the point possible. And so at PSE, we've generally taken the philosophy that we'll try to do anything we can to help a particular user, as long as it doesn't shortchange or heavily impact all the other people that are trying to use this shared resource. So on Bridges, we've tried to have a combination of traditional batch jobs that you expect to wait for a long time, but also have some availability for interactive work and very short, immediate turnaround jobs that we reserve resources for. So we're not maximizing our utilization of the system. We have it's a more complicated function to optimize, to get a balance of interactive, immediately available resources for people who need to do quick turnaround things, but also then utilizing the system as much as possible and packing in the jobs and making sure that the resources are busy. So finding the right balance there is something that has, and I think it's a potentially a moving target as workflows come and go, and then being responsive to certain special requests of reservations, dedicating time where that's the most efficient thing to do for things that otherwise would be very disruptive of work that's happening on the rest of the system. Being able to consult directly with the users, and then for very large projects, being able to again have some have some special consultation and arrange for dedicated time. So there's a couple of examples here. We were very much involved in this COVID-19 HPC consortium when the pandemic was at its peak, and a lot of people wanted to do work to model what was happening in the pandemic. And so in this case, we facilitated some very large runs, but that required a very substantial part of the system. But we were also supporting people who are doing a lot of work during the day, in particular sort of time sensitive things like classroom work, running their classes off of the system. So we arranged to run these large scale things in the nighttime, and the system would go back to normal in the daytime. I've mentioned many times having dedicated staff available to facilitate some of these special requests, and then you're able to get some nice outcomes from for this particular effort that was actually as the pandemic was developing, was providing data and insight to high-level government agencies to help them with their decision making. And then, like I mentioned, we do some things that actually are happening in real time in the world, like flood forecasting and being able to with some short notice spin up reservations and respond to what's happening in the real world. So as part of this, with all that complexity there that I just went through, our team established something they called the Continuous Improvement Committee, where we would get suggestions from researchers using the system, and then sort of prioritize these and look at them, and so we've got some nice numbers here. Out of 70, so this has not been around for a very long time. So March of 2021, so a year and a half, later, we've had 77 suggestions come in, and 58 of those we've been able to take action on. Fine tuning, some of the practices for on the system of, retaining some job submission files or enhancing this on-demand interactive interface, more informative error messages, and some better monitoring of the system, and clarifying documentation. And this has been a really very successful effort on our part to have a team that was looking at these, prioritizing them, and turning them into actions through sort of task forces that are assembled as needed to address these suggestions as they come in. And then feeding into also what obviously we it is human intensive, but we want to automate whatever we can, and so automating monitoring and provide developing the tools that we need to automate these things as much as possible, and help ourselves out and the users, and reduce user friction, and also our own effort wherever possible. Just at the beginning of this month, we had a transition from the Exceed program in NSF was, as I mentioned, this overarching program, making the human resources and other services needed to tie all the NSF cyber infrastructure together. So after 10 years, Exceed transitioned to Access. But I want to talk a little. I was heavily involved in Exceed, and so I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned from Exceed as well, as it's going out the door. And we actually published a document, or we've submitted a document. I don't know if it's been published yet, to NSF, with kind of our lessons learned and our best known practices that we developed or used during the Exceed project. So that's something we can probably, if folks are in, it might be something of interest, for this effort. And so I can help Sergio or I can help find the links to these documents as they become available, and share those. But we felt like Exceed was a tremendous resource and service to the community over the decade that it was in place. And there was a number of things that we felt like, and this was really very distributed, obviously, serving the entire national community, bringing together all these diverse resource providers. I mean, we support a very diverse national community just from PSE, just from our our Bridges 2 system, and in Exceed we wanted to bring together and unify wherever possible services that are connecting and are common to these all the supercomputing centers and service providers that were funded to provide resources to the research community. So so having a unified user portal that people could go to access all these various resources was a very key part of that. Anything that is common there, being able to have it to accessing and using all these different systems, or be able to just find the information that is specific to those diverse resources. Having that all in a unified portal was key. Also having a unified allocation of these diverse resources, having one place instead of a dozen places that users could go to if they wanted to ask for time, and having all those resources laid out and described together, and so users could compare and figure out what they needed for their research, and ask for help about any of those resources from one central place through the single help desk, and report issues there as well. Really helped to, again, reduce the user friction and help people find the things they needed. I'll go a little bit more into this later, but we talked about coordinated advanced support and training was a big part of Exceed. And then I just mentioned, basically a software and resource catalog, letting the research community know all the things that are available to them through NSF. Had ways, for you to also, again, just reducing user friction as much as possible with unified authentication mechanisms that you can move from one place to another in the NSF ecosystem without having to sign in multiple times. And then a lot of work into coordinating on security and leveraging all the expertise across all these service providers that were coordinated with Exceed, led to help very fast reaction times, and also very a lot of defensive measures being able to spread quickly and prevent the spread of security breaches. So a lot of strength in numbers there. Common data transfer. I see I'm going to have to speed up substantially. So I think this is so I'm going to keep moving. One I wanted to touch on a little bit more, which is a service that I led for a few years up until just recently, the end of Exceed, something we call the Extended Collaborative Support Service. Some of you may have run into this before. So this was an effort to, kind of as the name very nicely lays out, allocate time from those who have been funded across all these resource providers and who are funded and through Exceed to basically embed an Exceed personnel who are based at all these supercomputing centers, embed computational experts with a research group for up to a year, and give them part of that person's time to develop a collaborative project to see what did they need in terms of being able to maximize their utilization of these computational systems, and help them develop a plan to address that. And it had to be collaborative. They couldn't just throw code over the fence at us and say optimize this or something like that. They needed to have someone on their side who was working on it together with this Exceed ECSS expert, and they would work together and complement each other's strengths and help address the weaknesses or the needs of the group. And this was we had a lot of success there. We kind of divided this up for our internal purposes into sort of a traditional person embedded with a research project, but then we also would look to people who are developing like community software and collaborate with them to help develop that for these systems. If it was not just a single research group, but really a community effort, we support that, and also other types of accessing the systems like through web portals and gateways, and then particular outreach to some of these domains that were less less well represented or had not traditionally been big users of these high performance computing systems. So we actually had people apply for this time. So we would allocate the time, and we had expert staff that as I mentioned, could be requested for up to a year, giving them up to 25% of their time working with this research group. So that's a lot of funding. I mean, that's a lot, again, intensive effort. But over the 10 years of Exceed, this is just a highlight of some of the outcomes of particular groups. We saw, again, in 2011, some of these genomics groups were using these resources for the first time, and this ECSS, this investment in working with these groups, led to some really incredible outcomes, and not just great science outcomes, but also these researchers, and in particular some graduate students that learned from the ECSS experts how to use these large scale systems, were able to then take this knowledge and it moved with them. So they went to new groups and they brought that expertise to the group, and then the group would go from a group that had never used these large scale resources before to to becoming major users. And we saw this kind of knowledge transfer happening as a result of these collaborations. And in the end, these graduate students and these labs did some very large scale, very advanced work that was really highly impactful. This is a really fun paper that was published in Science, I don't know, a little over a year ago, and finding a mammal species with 2 X chromosomes in males, and another lab that analyzed the data from the identical twin astronauts. So this is nice to present here to NASA. And PSC was involved in these studies, but also this Exceed ECSS helped facilitate some of the work that was done on the NASA twin study. and comparing comparing the DNA and the expression of DNA in the bodies of these astronauts, and looking at the difference between the Earthbound astronaut and the one who had been up in space, and leading to some really interesting insights there, published in Cell. And then also the same team just doing some really crazy scale work in genomics, looking at the microbes in 60 cities across the world, and that keeps expanding the number. That's out of date, but published another nice study in Cell, looking at the transfer of antimicrobial resistance within urban environments, and this really large scale international effort would not have been possible without both the computational resources provided through PSC and other NSF funded supercomputing, but also the human investment there with this extended collaborative support service. Okay, so it probably looks like I'm probably going to go to my 3:15 point, but I'll go pretty quickly through this, and then we can go back to whatever people want to talk more about. So this is now more, sort of SEEDS ended and my role there ended, but I've been filling up my time with these big NIH data projects. One of these is called HubMap, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit of detail. We won the HubMap award in large measure because my colleague Alex Ropoleski a year earlier had brought to PSC this Brain Initiative project, the Brain Image Library, to archive and make available for analysis to the national community very large scale brain imaging data sets. So quickly on HubMap, this is the Human Biomolecular Atlas program, and so it has very ambitious goals that won't be fully realized in its lifetime, but we're trying to develop a framework for mapping the human body at single cell resolution, both the molecular information and the structural information together in a human reference atlas. So this is focused on generating these views of 3D human tissues to the cellular level, and developing the tools and techniques that will be necessary to do such a thing. Doing this on an open data platform, highly engaged with the research community. And so this is basically just stating that again, it takes a very diverse group of people to do this. So we have Jonathan and I on the computational side, and the infrastructure side, but also so we're part of what's called the HubMap Integration, Visualization and Engagement, or HIVE. So if I say HIVE, that's what I'm talking about there. The NIH loves their snappy acronyms. So that is actually a collaboration of several teams, and so the HIVE is sort of the technology group, and I mentioned that's Carnegie Mellon, Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, University of Pittsburgh, but also we collaborate with Harvard and several others, Indiana, New York Genome Center, and as I mentioned, Harvard University, to provide these tools and the mapping technologies that are part of the HIVE. So I'm going to focus mostly on the infrastructure side of this, but there's a big technology effort, and then all these with T's in their name are those actually providing the data, the sequencing and imaging data and other assay data that will drive this. So this is kind of the high level view there, and so this is these tissue mapping centers are collecting tissue, running their assays, and then sending the data to the HIVE, where we ingest those data. They're derived from all different human tissues, all different organs, and many different techniques. So it's very complex. It is so complex. This is a quick overview of all the different biomolecular technologies that are being employed in HubMap. It's a really nice chart. I love this chart, showing you kind of the scale of these things from the organ level down to subcellular, what these different assays are targeting, and sort of the coverage and the different biomolecular entities that are revealed through the different assays. So that's a lot of complexity. And so we're trying to take all that complexity and build a fair, open, flexible data platform to make these data available to the research community in a way that is useful. So, we're focusing on, so to do this, there's a few elements here, and this doesn't probably capture everything, but as a consortium, we set some policies. As the infrastructure, we developed something we think is quite flexible to meet the complexity of this task. We have very robust provenance with unique identifiers for everything that comes into us. We try to organize it with and make it usable with ontologies and standardized metadata, and then analysis pipelines that we try to check all the boxes in terms of interoperability, reusability, reproducibility. And then when we publish things, again, adhering to standards to make those data as findable and accessible as possible. So, so we've got our policies. I'm gonna go very quick. This is, this looks a bit scary, but this is, I mean, I think pretty standard layers here in terms of, but a lot of flexibility in establishing how we'd approach this. So, we have key resources that we need to support the data. So, the high level view here is that whatever is in orange here is hosted in public cloud. In our case, it's AWS. Anything in blue is hosted on-prem at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. And then the pink here is actually a service that we use, Globus, which some of you may be familiar with, to unify authentication and authorization and data transfer. So so the idea here is that from the low-level resources, we build the necessary APIs to do all the things that are needed to handle the complex data, and then build applications on top of those APIs. And this is so this is what we call a flexible hybrid cloud microservices architecture. And the idea is that we design it so that you saw the big group of collaborators across all the US, so that these collaborators can develop tools that we then plug in to this infrastructure, and we can incorporate that, the APIs provide the necessary interface to the resources to do the various things. So, for example, the portal itself, pictured here, is just another app. This data portal is another app in this framework, and utilizes all the infrastructure. This Azimuth tool annotates cellular single cell data. It's developed by a totally separate group at New York, and they wrapped it up and integrated it in a few days into the infrastructure. So so in practice, I think it's been working, and I think I'm going to go ahead, and there's more slides that I can go through if there's interest. But I'll pause and stop there. I think this picture kind of sums up a lot of the things that we're doing there, in terms of that this hybrid cloud approach and microservices. And I can dig into more detail if we want to go there, or we can talk about some of the things I've already presented.
Phil, that was fantastic, and we do have time if it looks like it makes sense to go back and cover some more slides. We can do that. Everyone, we have probably a good 45 minutes or so available for discussion and questions. And Phil and Sergio will be able to participate and well respond to questions. You covered a lot of ground, and you were really checking off a number of the questions that we have in the back of our mind as far as the study goes. You spoke here to some data and computing infrastructure questions, and really appreciate that. Your slide on best practices was just phenomenal. I wanted to maybe circle back, go to kind of an overarching big picture question about user needs and business needs. And you're responding to a number of them, and you have some really good examples of how you've responded to those. Are there particular existing user needs or business needs that you would kind of lift up to the top of the list that might guide NASA's the SMD effort related to data and computing infrastructure, basically to support open source science? So it's that open source science piece. You have some really invaluable insights.
Yeah, and I guess I'll say that just to provide a little context. I mean, I think the context is really really important there, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about. I know you mentioned that you've got resources distributed across many different sites, and so the kind of the two examples that I talked about are NSF efforts, right, to serve a national research community distributed many different types of scientific domains and needs, having a flexible resource that was responsive to that very broad demand and diverse researcher groups was that's kind of one aspect of that's one particular view of it that we've been doing for 30 plus years. This HubMap view is a bit different, where it's taking in basically taking in these inputs, these very complicated things, trying to put it all together in a way that we can present basically a product to researchers that will facilitate all kinds of human health research, and so from the but then also making available all the tools and the resources there, and so and focusing on making those open and reusable and other things that I mentioned up front. So I guess in your effort, is there kind of one of those views that you think is more applicable to the needs of the study right now, of in terms of sort of like making a sort of tools and data and product available to the community versus providing this research computing support service aspect of it?
Well, I think at this point it's really both. Your focus on the support side of it has been really helpful to kind of think about some of that, and the support is responsive to user needs, but it's also it's a type of need itself, and so it's driven by the user needs, but it's also kind of a standalone, or well, not complete. It's integrated, but it's a key part of what you have to do or what you have done to meet those user needs. And like you say, we've got by some estimates, 80 separate sites that SMT is supporting today, and we're looking at how what an infrastructure might look like that would facilitate and support open source science across those. And I think as you talked, you did identify pretty clearly some of the advantages, in a sense, the return on the investment of some of the changes you've made in the last 5 or 10 years, and maybe that's a direction to go with this discussion at this point. You have made some changes, and you've seen some benefits from that. Any particular ones that you might want to speak to?
Maybe I might call on my colleague Sergio here for a minute. Sergio, does anything, I mean, I think maybe we're talking about, let's see. So we go back to some of the best practices here that we talked about and this sort of continuous improvement. Sergio, is there anything that sort of rises to the top of your mind in terms of the adjustments, recent things that we've done there?
Well, I joined BSC in 1995, so that's a long time ago. And my first mission was to work with Cray to get people to like accustom them to parallel computing and what that could do. And so, I think what has changed over time was, in a way, the constraints have multiplied. So, back when I joined this NSF program, the support was really lavish, specifically the funding for, working with users, even at the advanced level, like the kind of embedded support that Phil mentioned we did in ECSS. There was a lot of that, and there was like a lot of funding for it. And vendors like Cray, they had folks who they had application specialists who actually did this. So it was like basically a Cadillac era. And progressively, that has become narrower and narrower. And so the main task is, along with obviously the evolving technology, and the task is to help folks do what they want to do, but maybe also influence what they should be wanting to do, which in our case is kind of more difficult than, say, a DOE lab where they have their mission critical applications and or like a national lab where maybe NASA is the same. So in our case, we have to work with the academic community, and every academic PI is like a sovereign of their kingdom, and so you got to work with a lot of big egos. Some of them then win Nobel prizes, so that's the reward. But it's that's where really the challenge lies, and the evolution lies in adapting to both the technology and helping folks understand the technology, use it, but do that with progressively fewer resources. So continue the continuous improvement things and the software task force and stuff that came out of the need to kind of be a lot more streamlined and automated when possible in making our life easier and making it possible for 5 folks to do or 6 folks to handle hundreds of projects, where previously when I started we had maybe 20 people doing it. And there's also the whole outreach training aspect to it. Yeah, I mean, that's the change, is what can you do with fewer resources, basically, and how can you, what are tools that actually work, or methods, procedures, practices that actually work. And I think what the slides from Tom, who's actually my go-to guy there, who actually handles the users on a daily, nightly basis, put down there, and the slide that Phil shows is kind of what we learned from that. And it's not cheap. I mean, it's so, for instance, Phil showed the example with Louisiana. Just as we were speaking, the guy who does that said, hey, this tropical depression 9 looks like it's going to be a hurricane. So I'm going to need, over the next 4 or 5 days, I'm going to need some reservations. I'm going to need some resources. What can you give me? And Tom is on PTO today. And however, he jumped in and said, okay, what do you need? And, so yeah, that's what it takes.
Yeah, so definitely the right mix of people who have the who have, I guess, the right
Yeah, it's not easy to find them.
the right attitude for this kind of for this kind of work and support. You know, it's really about the people. It always, I mean, it really always comes down to that, doesn't it? Is having the right people and what a difference that makes. You know, so that's key. I think, you know, cultivating that culture at you know at PSC and other places, you know, do a terrific job as well of you know, just having sort of the right approach to handling, you know, sometimes the the very these kinds of demands, and but sort of the right mix of being responsive and doing what we can, but also you know, saying, well, that, you know, that's just not going to happen because you know, there's other constraints. So yeah, so I think that's really key. And what you said, Sergio, also about you know, being able to pull out of all these interactions, the best practices, um, you know, not only on our side but also on the user side, and see what works. And oftentimes, you know, what the researcher, um, you know, consumer of the resources is wanting to do, that they think is the best thing to do, we already know that's not the best thing to do, because, you know, we're gathering that experience, we're you know, channeling it through, you know, through these kinds of mechanisms internally. And so then being able to guide the consumer to better solutions, taking more of the Steve Jobs approach of telling people what they really want. Also, obviously, always listening, but you know, with enough experience, then you can see, and you know, after you see things a certain number of times, then you know, this approach is going to be better for you in the end. And so I think, you know, capturing that is really key.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. You know, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but going back to what Sergio was saying, um, you know, he was describing at one point there was sort of a Cadillac version, and now there's fewer resources, but I still, you know, we can hear the strong attention to support that is part of your services and your offerings. Um, Kind of building on that, with ECSS, that, what you were describing sounded almost like transparent support services. Like you have a system in the background, but you don't burden the users with trying to master the system. You have staff who understand what's available and kind of can steer people in the right direction. That seems like perhaps it sounds like an example of what you were just saying a moment ago of helping people understand, um, uh, not just how to get what they're asking for, but perhaps to think about another way of kind of achieving what they're trying to do, because you know what that support system is. Um, and there's a culture of service that your folks have to guide people to the right, to the tool that's going to meet their needs. Am I tracking with you on that?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. So I'll take a stab, Sergio, if you want to add, but I'll just say that one of the most one of the things that was really key to the whole process was, I mean, we had, you know, obviously we were doing some matchmaking, you know, behind the scenes with, you know, our available staff, and a key thing here that I don't think I highlighted, you know, as I was sort of rushing through. Let's see, it says it somewhere here. You know, a key thing was that we had 10 Exceed sites. So, you know, there was 70 individuals. You know, they weren't full time; they were, you know, part time, you know, helping out. But 70 individuals to draw upon for this kind of activity across all of these sites that were funded. And so that was sort of a critical mass that we had to have in place to be able to do this, because we're trying to support a very diverse group of researchers across the country. So we needed people with different expertise in different areas, and being able to leverage people across all those sites was was the biggest thing. So, you know, at PSC, we have a certain subset of those skills, but if you take all the different sites that are funded to do this kind of thing, then you really have great coverage across domains and across computational data expertise and you know, portal portals and all these different things that people want to do. So that was an important thing, was just the matchmaking. But then the thing I was started to say was that once we identify the right person, or who we think is the right person to work with, a particular research group or a particular community effort, then the representatives, the ECSS staff person and representatives from the research group or the community effort would sit down together, and the first thing they'd do would be talk about what's the researcher trying to do, or what is this group trying to do, and they would make a work plan together about how they think they would get there. And that, it was not binding by any means, but you'd have it written down, kind of how, the steps that they think they needed to take, and that was an opportunity, just as you said, for, rather than them kind of just sort of figuring it out on their own through documentation and things, which is also important, but they were able to guide the researchers to the right solutions based on what they heard that their needs were, and actually develop a plan that then they could execute. And it would always change, it wouldn't always be the same, but they would they would have that sort of every other week or something, touch base and update and revise that as they go. But so I waxed a little eloquent, or at least long-winded there, but I was just going to say that establishing a plan up front, having that conversation with the people who are the experts behind the scene is critical. And by the way, in order to do that, you got to have a group of experts you can draw upon that kind of cover that need.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So
Sergio? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, what Phil just said is, I mean, what you said transparent. Well, we wanted to make it transparent, but not too transparent. That's where the collaborative comes in. And so we did want, I mean, the philosophy was like teach a person to fish, right? So the work plan went for up to a year. In general, it went for a year, and it would have, like Phil says on the slide, maybe 20-25% of an expert that we would identify on our end, on the ECSS end, and we wanted to see at least as much investment from the research group, like a postdoc, or but somebody who would own the code, because it was their code that we were working with. It was their application. So the idea was that once we were done working on a specific project, like a specific subset of what they were doing, like a bottleneck that kept them from, like, that held the code back or the application back. So once the idea was to have a work plan where, jointly we would remove that roadblock, or we would improve the code. But then when we went away, which we would, then the person who worked with us, could take it from there, incorporate the advances into their code base, and run with it on their own. So that was kind of the idea. And as Phil said, that very often led to like very important, like workforce development aspects, where when we work with folks who started off as students, that then helped them to become leading researchers in their own right. And that's really the ethos that PSC has had, and other sites too, but PSC has really been famous for from the beginning, where a large number of our staff members, like this Tom guy that I mentioned frequently, they started as students. They started as interns at PSC many years ago. So I mean, we love growing talent for other folks, but if we can keep them ourselves, that's even better.
Yeah, it sounds like embedded in your service provision, you're trying to build local capacity that you can leave behind, grow in individual researchers, and have kind of talent blossom, in a sense, because of the support, because of the way you've approached support. At least that's kind of how I jotted it down. I hope I'm paraphrasing you somewhat.
That's the best outcome when that can
Yeah.
happen. It's not,
Yeah.
you know, by no means is that always the case, but I think, you know, this kind of approach gave that, you know, it did engender that kind of outcome, you know, on many occasions.
Yeah. There's an interesting question that's come into the queue that kind of goes back to this almost a cultural type question. And it specifically, it's about whether there are any lessons learned that you might lift up, especially through with regard to ECSS. Um, Lessons learned about overcoming the natural reluctance to collaborate in competed research.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so, um, so I'll just sort of rattle off my thoughts as they come here. I think there's a lot of angles on this particular question, and I'll speak from my, you know, my perspective, which is by no means, you know, complete of the various different. To me, it seems that in certain fields of research, this is more of a challenge. Every field of research has this, of course. Seems like certain fields that I've encountered have it more than others. I think one thing that helped on the ECSS front, was that, you know, we had the collaborator in this case was, you know, Exceed staff member, a staff member at the various supercomputing centers. Some of these researchers or some of these staff members, they were, you know, many of them, had, you know, advanced degrees in a particular domain of science, but most of those in that community, you know, were not, you know, pursuing their own, you know, did not have their own research lab, pursuing sort of their own research in a traditional way, and so, so I'm not sure if it was that, but I don't, Sergio, to my mind, you know, I didn't see that particular concern come up. I can't recall an instance of that particular concern coming up, and I don't. It may have been because again, you know, these staff, you know, although highly trained in a certain domain, often, and in addition to the computational aspects, you know, weren't viewed as competitors in that sense, you know, and, as they might have been if it was another research sort of lab. So that's one part of it, and I would like to hear Sergio's view. But another part,
Yeah.
but let me just say this though. Um, we certainly did also see, this group of staff, and I was one of them. I did this work as ECSF staff member, collaborating with people in particular instances that I was involved in, through my work with different research groups. I did become aware that, hey, these two groups are doing, you know, some things that are similar, and there's an opportunity here for these two groups to actually collaborate together. And so, of course, you know, we wouldn't talk to another group without, you know, getting permission first. But I had opportunities there to talk to one group and say, hey, you know, is it okay if I, you know, talk to this other group that's doing, you know, something similar, and maybe you want to get together. And we actually had, you know, we were actually in some cases actually able to generate collaborations between research teams, who were open to that kind of collaboration. So, so those are my thoughts. I didn't really run into that a lot. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think it might have been, you know, just sort of the different role that the you know, the center support staff were playing, in that collaboration compared to, you know, what a typical research collaboration might be.
Right. And so I guess, you know, obviously, as Phil just hinted at, there's, you know, we need to distinguish between like the staff aspect, so the, you know, distributed organization which has its challenges. And I do believe, Phil, that we will be producing like a report on that. I guess that's going to be highlighted in the Succeed final report and in the, you know, which will be publicly available. So I think across the project, there'll be, I mean, that's something that, you know, our review panels have often told us to like write up because it's a general interest, you know, organizations that feature cooperation. Uh, in the specific, and then in the specific area that like of advanced support that ECSS was dealing with, I think maybe there were less tensions than in other aspects, although you had to be careful. Like, you know, what we tried to do when we assigned an expert to work with a group, we kind of, one figure of merit was where they, if the allocation, like the service, like the resources that the group got, whether that was at the institution that this person was at. Again, you know, we, you know, as Phil said, one of the, I mean, the reason for ECSS was to be able to draw across the expertise of many partner institutions, but at least in terms of like actually, you know, interfacing with the day-to-day jobs, sometimes there are sensitivities because each site has its own like little secrets of something that, you know, works better, works worse. And then these folks compete every 4 or 5 years for like a new, machine. So there are some sensitivities there, but I think over the years, not just of Exceed, but there was another program, well, a couple of other programs since then. I mean, before then, we kind of learned to navigate this, and maybe again, you know, and a lot of us who are doing this stuff knew each other and were friends, so that helps. But there were issues like, you know, the local supervisor of person may not necessarily, I mean, they may have their own priorities for the staff member, which do not necessarily align what they're supposed to do on their ECSS work plan. But over the years, over the 11 years, we kind of, I think, got better and better at navigating this. But yeah, there are always issues.
Yeah, thanks, Sergio. I had not even thought about that aspect of it. I focused on the collaboration between an ECSS staff member and a research group that was not involved, you know, in Exceed, but just coming as a consumer. But you're totally right. Exceed itself was this collaboration between competitors that were, you know, competing for funding for supercomputing. You know, the new supercomputer solicitations coming out from NSF and other types of programs. And you know, we really had to develop a strong virtual organization that you know, and this was, you know, there was some great leadership there from John Towns, in, you know, from the beginning, again, having sort of respected and, you know, leaders that could help get everyone on the same page and help us sort of, you know, wear our different hats at different times, enabled us to, I think, you know, be really successful there. You know, despite, you know, there definitely was a lot of inherent competition between these groups that were working together actually within Exceed.
Well, let me stay with Exceed for a moment. There's a question here that I think is just, the timing is perfect. Were there particular lessons learned through the Exceed work that helped make access better?
So, so again, I'll say what comes to my mind. There's, I mean, you know, these services are so, you know, broad and far-reaching. There's there's a lot of aspects that we could talk about. So I'll just comment on the ones that immediately come to my mind. So I guess since Access started, I guess 3 weeks ago, I guess it remains to be seen, you know, how much you know, some of the Access programs will incorporate the lessons from Exceed. I can say that, you know, some of the Access awards that were successful, mostly I can speak for the one at so PSE is leading one of those Access awards on the allocation side. And we're partners on a couple of other ones. On the allocation side, I think absolutely there was a lot of lessons learned there, and I know that our team that was, you know, successful in doing that incorporated those lessons into what they proposed for Access. I didn't manage to get. I had some slides actually on Access that I didn't manage to get into my deck. But you know, again, in our future communications, happy to share, you know, anything that's of interest. But one thing that we learned was just the need to have you know, very flexible allocation process. Exceed, tried to do this to an extent, but still many people found it, a bit too rigid and challenging for, especially if they had, they didn't really know what they wanted or needed, but they had to try some things. We did have ways to do that in Exceed through startup allocations, but the new allocation for Access provides, even more flexibility there in terms of, what one key thing was taking away and Sergio will probably help, flesh this out or correct me if I get something, not quite right here, but basically you're applying for credits, in the system, and and there's different levels of access, and below a certain level, it's just very easy to get a certain amount of time there. So, and again, this was done in Exceed to some extent, but in Access they've taken that to another level where you can get pretty significant resources without having to put down all the details of what you want to do and having optimized your code perfectly and all these things, and then those basically you get credits that then can be used at whatever resource you want to use them at. So you don't have to even target a particular system when you're requesting the time. You request the time, and then you can allocate it, and as you kind of figure out where is the best place to go, then you can use that. So the allocation process, application process, review process, that there's a lot of lessons there that we're trying to take into account and be responsive to in Access, and also broadening the service there to allocate not just computational resources, but even potentially expanding this to other types of allocations of other types of resources that researchers need to share. So there's a lot more we could say about that, but I'll stop there. That's one particular lesson. I don't know, Sergio, if you want to say anything about that.
No, although maybe it's fair to say that, Access is about half the size of the Exceed program. So some things that were in Exceed are not in Access. ECSS is one of those things. Also, the whole we had in Exceed, we had a very strong outreach training and so apparatus. So that's much less well funded in Access. And I think one of the reasons NSF had for that is that they wanted to include the community a lot more, because obviously there's a lot of advanced computing going on research campuses everywhere. And I think one of the missions that Access has, and that we obviously are very willing to help with because we want to leverage it, is kind of mobilize resources on a much broader basis than the 12 or 18 or whatever partner sites that we had in Exceed. So essentially they would like hundreds of institutions along the country to kind of chip in, and we'll have to see how that can work. It would be extremely interesting if we could make that work.
Very good. Thank you both. We've got time for one more question here, probably, before we need to kind of wrap things up. And this is kind of one of those brass tacks kind of questions. Were there particular resources that you had the most trouble getting to work in a work together or work as part of or in a supercomputer environment?
Particular resources. So maybe when we say resources, talking about, I guess, sort of trying to decide like how fine grained we're talking about here in terms of like specific kinds of computing or storage resources, like hardware resources, or
a specific example that came in is Postgres or MySQL, those types of resources, anything kind of in that ballpark, that may not or may be challenging to get to work in a supercomputing environment?
Yeah, so again, I guess, yeah, looking at it from, I mean, we have tackled, those kind of things. I think maybe, like with a database, I may not be hitting the right the right flavor of this question, but we have, tried to put a lot of emphasis, as I mentioned in the last few iterations of the supercomputer resources we have in supporting sort of non-traditional applications of and so I think, in terms of like a long running service like a database or something, right? That's a little bit different use case than your traditional, run a bunch of, jobs, and those jobs end within, 24 hours. There's the wall time is controlling, the access and allocating, resources that just live forever. Um, so I think, we also had been, so I'll say this, for a while on bridges, in sort of that vein, and I may not be going in the right direction with this answer, but in that vein on bridges one, we tried to people were able to apply for VMs that we would spin up for them. And so we would create VMs for researchers who wanted to do these, have some sort of long running service that was close to the supercomputing resources. And we found that this became a really difficult thing, because of, just how diverse the requests and needs were for these virtual machines running close to our system. That was a huge time sink, and something that we felt was not was not worth bringing over to, to Bridges 2. Now, and Sergio, you can maybe help me here, but we do still, people still can request sort of long running resources, to host services to some extent, but we've scaled that down to I think to a great degree, or given more responsibility to the researcher to be the one that, that maintains that and takes care of it. Sergio, can you,
Yeah.
help me with
Yeah,
that transition there?
Yeah, I think now we do it on a kind of case by case basis. So if somebody, expresses or says, hey, can you install like this in a VM for me? Then we kind of try to talk to them. And by the way, one recent tool that we're relying on more and more is office hours, or like, just short, maybe 30-minute Zoom calls or something. Like the pandemic did teach us some things that we didn't think of so much before. But where, okay, we asked them to explain, like, what do you actually want? Okay, let's step back. Don't tell me right now what solution you want, but what is it? What does your workflow look like? How do you want to do this? And in many cases, we find that they just said VM or container or whatever it is because they heard from their colleagues that this is the way to go somewhere else, but it may not be the best way to do it on our system. So that's where we try to find the solution that's going to work best. And if that means, and especially like maybe for like if they want to host database or maybe a web server or something, then yeah, the VM is the way to go, and we do that. But usually for many things we steer them toward like a more bare metal solution, which is going to perform better anyway. So
Yeah.
and we do have this on demand interactive thing where, so again, we try to as much as possible analyze the individual use case and figure out a solution that's going to work.
Right, right. And with some of those
Yeah.
services, like VM, one of the big challenges was, researchers would want like root access, but the VM has access to our shared resources and those kind of things. So those were some of the challenges.
Yeah, I'm kind of picking up a bit on what both of you are saying, and especially this office hours thing. Where it sounds like, in part, what you've done is add a bit more of a almost like type as part of providing the services. So you don't just provide what people ask for, you work with them to kind of diagnose their needs a little bit and jointly figure out what the response or solution might be.
Absolutely.
I think the lesson
those-
learned there
yeah.
is that that kind of process can, like Sergio said, save us a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And also, you know, help the researcher get what they really need rather than what they
Yeah.
might have heard they think that someone
Very-
told them they need.
Very good. Well, thank you both. I'm going to hit one slide here and then turn things over to Elena to close things out. But I tell you, this has been just a fantastic conversation for me. We held quite a number of people the full time on a Friday. That says a lot for what both of you brought to the discussion.
Thank you.
For those of you who have been involved with the full set of our data and computing architecture study workshops, we have 4 more coming up. And Jim and Sergio, we certainly would invite either or both of you to join any of these that might be of interest. NVIDIA on the 3rd of October, Texas Advanced Computing Center on October 5th, the Vera Rubin Observatory on October 7th, and then later in the month, Esri will join us October 21st. So those are the ones we have on the calendar right now, and we hope to be able to announce a couple of others in the not too distant future. So we're working on those too. So once again, thank you, but let me turn it to Elena to close things out.
I just wanted to echo Peter and say thank you so much for speaking with us today. And it was just a really great talk, and we really appreciated all your insights and answers to our questions. So thank you. And also thank you to all the attendees who are here and asked such great questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and happy to follow up with anything that's of interest, share things that we referenced and so forth.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.